what I'd like to do is really to, talk about how philanthropy can impact Black communities by engaging in what I describe as the generational challenge of restoring justice into our justice system. And I'm going to do that. I sort of walk through three parts of this talk. One is just to describe a little bit about myself so that I can explain why I do think that this is a confluence in the right moment. We talk about the problem that we have in our justice system, which I suspect many of you are well familiar with. And then finally to say a little bit about why criminal justice is a place where I think right now, right here, we can make a real difference for Black communities and in our country. So let me begin just by saying a bit about myself and why I describe this as a confluence and happening at the right time. I'm a person of mixed heritage. I'm Black and Filipino. There's lots of other stuff mixed in there, but I've always identified as those two things. I've worked in social justice, but really much more specifically criminal justice for now coming up on more than 25 years. And I never really imagined that I would be optimistic about the potential for us to dramatically alter the system that we have in place. I'll say a little bit about why I feel that way. The third thing is that I used to be one of you, or one of some of you. So I used to be in philanthropy. I worked at the Rockefeller Foundation for about 6 years. And I will say in all candor that in my time there I struggled. I gave myself a solid C at best in terms of thinking about how as a grant maker I could have an impact on Black people and on communities. Some of that is on me and my lack of sophistication. Some of it I think was on the institution. And now I run this place called the Vera Institute of Justice, which is a national organization. We drive what I describe as transformative reform of our justice system. We use a combination of research and innovation, the idea of getting the public sector. The criminal justice system is monopolized by the public sector, but so getting it to change and do things differently is important. And increasingly using communications and amplification as a way of driving change in that system. I've seen a lot of change in our sector in the past 5 years, and this gets back to the timeliness of what I'm going to talk about. So let me begin with part two, which is, what are we talking about when we say reform of the criminal justice system? And I think we have to begin historically. The American way of dealing with misconduct or conduct that has been defined as illegal, as criminal, can only be described as an international aberration. An international aberration in terms of the size of the system that has been constructed to solve problems. In terms of the scale of the brutality that it imposes on people who are labeled wrongdoers. In terms of what I describe as its needless cruelty and its irrationality. None of that is news to you all, I imagine, but let me just try to paint for you the picture of how the American system is so different than others. Our Western European peers incarcerate at a rate that is 6 to 10 times less than we do. So if you take Germany as an example, which is is frankly our closest peer, big economy, big diverse population, they are incarcerated at a tenth the rate that we do. When someone encounters the justice system, when they have been prosecuted for an infraction, the Germans use something called day fines as the sanction. It's a fine that you're able to pay based upon your ability to pay in 85% of the cases. Incarceration is used 6% all cases. Contrast that with America, where if you're going to come into contact with the criminal justice system, you're going to spend time behind bars 70% of the time. So incarceration in America is the default. We have more of it. We send people away for longer periods of time, and we're much meaner about it than other places are too. You will hear a lot over the course of the next month or so about this is the 25th anniversary of the 1994 crime bill, federal crime bill, which was the biggest federal incursion in the criminal justice system. It did a variety of things. It created a $10 billion fund for states to build prisons. So states did things like end parole or lengthen sentences. It funded hundreds of thousands of cops to put on the street. There were 60 new death penalty provisions. So this is the biggest example, and you'll hear it in the context a lot of the Democratic debate because Biden was a key author of it. It did things like it got rid of college in prison, so it said that Pell Grants could no longer be used by incarcerated students, despite all of the evidence showing how effective it was. So that is, in some respects, sort of been the tendency of the American system. It's like, how big, how long, how mean can you get? We spend $80 billion a year on this system, and it doesn't produce the kinds of results that anyone who is rational would be satisfied with. 2/3 of people who have been through the system will find themselves rearrested and reincarcerated after five years. If that were the sole measure of the system, that in and of itself would be a failure. But we now have in America, this is a stunning statistic, that 1 out of every 2 Americans has had an immediate family member in jail or prison, either right now or in the last 10 years. So we've constructed a system that has imposed burdens like that on 50% of our population, and it's much worse for Black folks. The rate of incarceration is double that in terms of family involvement. I throw just a few numbers at you that you guys know: 2.2 million people who are behind bars right now today, 7 million people who are under control of the justice system, meaning that they might be on probation or parole as well as being incarcerated. 11 million people arrested every year. So it's a massive, massive system. And the important thing to recognize is that it did not have to be so. This was democratically constructed. There's nothing special about the United States. We don't have a meaner set of folks. We don't have worse criminals. This was constructed largely. It began in the early 70s when we were actually incarcerating at the exact same level as our Western European peers. And all over the globe, there was a spike in crime, but we were the only country that responded by the war on drugs and the war on crime, which, as many of you probably know if you've read Michelle Alexander or many of the other fantastic scholars out there, was really a politicized response to the rights won by Black folks in the civil rights era, and an attempt, part of the Southern strategy of the Republican Party to win resentful white electorate, bring them into their corner. And from there, the system just grew out of control. By 2010, it had grown 700%. While all of other countries, so it's just like this, and all the other countries have remained the same. So democratically constructed, absolutely rationalized and justified. If you think about the concept of Black criminality and the way people are sort of fed to associate Black skin with criminality in ways that are diabolical in order to know that it's happening, through media images, through what the news chooses to show, through what politicians talk about, through the kinds of names that people are reduced to, felons, gangbangers, super predators. That was the stock and trade of the system and constructing the system. That was the rationale. But it didn't just begin in the 70s. This is something that we have lived with in this country. I'd like to describe our system of mass incarceration as just the latest iteration of a system of oppression that began with slavery, then convict leasing and black codes and Jim Crow and lynching and everything on up into the century that we're currently in. So that's the big thing that we're trying to solve for. And when I say solve, what do I mean? I mean shrink its footprint dramatically, eliminate its punitiveness and make it more restorative and healing, transform our societal response to problems that are of a public health nature into something that is dealt with as a public health solution. It is noted and remarkable that so many of them are black-led, and that they are building power in our community. And for that reason, because you have a big problem, because there's momentum, and because there's a way not only of changing policy that will affect and practice that will affect our communities, but will also affect the nation, and investing in power in our communities and political power. My argument is really that this is a generational effort that we have to take up. When I was younger, I was a social worker, and I worked with kids in my hometown of Washington, D.C., and I saw them getting sucked into the system. And frankly, I never imagined that there would be a time when we wouldn't do anything other than play defense. Or wring our hands or feel, sorry that no one cared about these issues other than a very small circle of us. But that time is over, and we need to be about it, and I think we can be. So thank you very much.